Hello and welcome to the Gooners podcast, where we have two good people and one absolute idiot who forgot to tweet our guest or send our guest the link for today's podcast. So apologize for being a few minutes late. We were all waiting on James and James is waiting on me. So welcome back, James, to the podcast. It's always good to have you on.
It's great. Don't worry about it. It was invaluable time. I could make a cup of tea in that time. It was all, I had to sort this lighting out. It helped, if anything. You did me a favor.
It was probably the next best thing to not having to come on with us in the first place.
It was a close second. But listen, I appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here. How are you guys both doing?
Doing well. And James, I don't know if the last time you were on, we had Owen on the pod yet or not, but Owen is Andy, but better looking.
Yeah, finally, I was waiting for that upgrade to happen.
Yeah.
It was one of the things holding the pod back.
I think it was. it was.
I'm really excited about this one because do you want to know what? If there's anything I love more than Thomas Partey and Arsenal to discuss, it's dogs, James. And I know that you've recently got a new puppy as well.
Yeah.
So how's daddy life going for you with a new pup?
Do you know what? It has been, I'll be honest, it's great. I've loved it. It's also been an absolute shock to the system.
It's worse than a child. They're worse than children.
As someone who had never had a puppy or a child, this has really knocked me for six. I'll be honest. I am not used to responsibility. So this has been, thank you very much for the ding there, very appropriate. But it's
even I can recognize a cricket term when I hear one.
Yeah, but it has been an experience. She's napping right now. And those are peaceful, blissful times at present.
Well, I would tell you it gets better, but I'm not a liar, so.
and as I told you, I mean, if she wants to make an appearance on the pod, it'll it can only improve the visuals.
That's true
to the guests. So, in our best attempt to try to distract from the fact that the club that's kind of the basis of the podcast is sliding down the table again. We've asked James back on because there's an article. We like to talk about your big articles. There's an article that came out on Friday, but my first thing is when you're walking around the offices of The Athletic, do people call you James or Gunnerblog or something else entirely? I mean, what's the...
That's a good question. They call me James. It feels very grown up, It's like when you're at school and you have a nickname, and then you go to college and like suddenly everyone calls you by a proper name, and it's a transition for me.
Is there a stage beyond that where I mean, like Mr. McNicholas or just something new altogether, like
I just want them to, yeah, or sir, just sir is fine. I do wonder, like, I wondered when I first joined The Athletic and we started doing stories together, I do wonder if some of the other writers were like, right, so you want me to retweet this and it's by someone called Gunnerblog. But I just have stuck to my guns. I've just sort of steadfastly refused to change, and they've been forced to change with me.
You've mainstreamed their ass. That was like when we, Andy and I tell the story all the time of when we showed up at Dick's Sporting Goods Park in Denver to do our first media gig, which ended up being a surprising interview with Josh Kroenke. But when we walked in, everyone, I mean, it was like out of a movie. Like everyone's eyes just go over, and they're like, "They're the bloggers, they're the podcasters," because
I know.
Because Andy's in shorts. I walk straight over to the buffet and start having sausages and pizza and stuff. And they're like, yeah, these guys have not done this before, I'm sure.
It's I don't know if I've ever told this story on here, but one of the first times I ever got in the press box at Arsenal, I just started doing some freelancing for Bleacher Report in the States. And I went in the press box, and I was kind of, a few journalists knew me from Gunnerblog, but I remember a very well-established, very nice journalist came up to me and just said, "What are you doing here?" And it was one of those weird moments, and I sort of feel like I still.
So were things ever the same between you and John Cross again after that?
I headbutted him, and then we all got on. But like,
by the way, if that's who it was, I don't know that to be the case.
It was not John Cross. I can confirm.
Too late. That's been clipped. It's out already.
He's tagged. He's been tagged.
Yeah. We did a TikTok with him already to put it through.
It wasn't John Cross, I have to tell you, but it was a journalist who I liked and respected, and still do like and respect. But it does sort of, I know exactly how you must have felt in that moment, and I still feel a bit like that to this day. But I'd rather
not when you come on here. Let's be frank. You're the one bringing credibility to us. So since the last time we had you on a few months ago, it was right after your pieces on Arshavin and the Cronkies, which were great pieces. You've written topics, covering kind of the whole gamut. I mean, Pepe, imagining Jose Mourinho's Arsenal.
That was a spicy comment section, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I bet. Arsenal's problems run deeper than Arteta, Edu, the Young Guns, Lacazette, the Bank of England loan, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Austria-Hungary in 1914. But the one article from, at least in its infancy of the first few days release, the comments and the worldwide reaction, the number of new subscriptions to The Athletic, the Pulitzer and Nobel Prizes that you've gotten from this article on Friday, an article about an inanimate object, a couple of rodents, a kid with a big Twitter following, and an anti-cancer charity. I mean, tell us where. I mean, we've chatted, but tell everyone where this first started from you. I mean, where the idea came from, why no one else in mainstream media has ever thought to do an expose such as this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes from the fact that I'm a fan, really, and like everyone else, I get embroiled and follow all these social media stories. And Arsenal has this huge online footprint, as you guys will know. It's got this huge online discourse around it, and this kind of ITK transfer culture is something that's sort of built up over the last few years. And it just struck me, to be honest, it struck me last summer that I thought it was at fever pitch. You had obviously the Bell, you had the Gerbil, you had the Gabriel's cloud formations. Where was he? Is Gardner confirming that he was in England? All these things. And I just thought this has got to such an extraordinary point, and it almost runs parallel to kind of traditional journalism. There's your main news outlets who I think have got the authority, and if they say something's happening, that comes with a certain weight, a certain gravitas. But then underneath that, there's this constant chattering and analysis and finding news reports in like Russian newspapers and hoping it might mean something positive. I just think it's fascinating, and I think I find it quite good fun. I know some people are like, find it a bit tiresome, but I find it all immensely entertaining. And I think it reached a kind of postmodern point with Arsenal where there was a sort of self-consciousness of like, we know this is a bit silly, but we're going big with it anyway. And you know that yourself with the Gerbil and how that became kind of a satire. So I think I pitched it originally in the summer. Things kept happening. Arsenal kept firing people, or, things kept moving. So we never got to do it. January transfer window finished. AFC Bell abdicated his responsibility as king of the Twitter ITKs. And I thought this is the time. And listen, I don't mind telling you this. So we have obviously access to our metrics on The Athletic in terms of what drives subscriptions. That piece has driven a good amount of subscriptions. The Athletic did good business.
The comments included a handful of people saying, I just renewed my subscription for this article, or I renewed. And, a couple people saying that. You kind of exponentially multiply that over the people who aren't going into the comments and saying that. Yeah. I think that's hilarious. I mean, there's so much good journalism in there. And that's the article that ends up doing
it is crazy. And it outperformed articles that have had like exclusive information about what's happening at Arsenal or whatever. But I think that just shows, people, they love this stuff. And maybe it's to do with the climate. Maybe people are up for a bit of levity, something a bit different, a bit lighter that might make them smile or laugh. Go on.
Is this the case with all your pieces, James? Do you have complete creative freedom with The Athletic? Or is it down to your own discretion, or are you sort of given direction of which way to go?
It's interesting. I mean, basically what happens on a Monday morning is we have a meeting with kind of the whole Arsenal team, and we chat about what it would be good to cover that week. But all the time, we're also having conversations about kind of bigger pieces that sit outside of the news schedule slightly. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever suggested anything and they've said no. I mean, they let me do like a big in-depth read about what sort of dinosaur Gunnersaurus was, where I interviewed like paleontologists from the National History Museum.
No interviews from the men's room outside Block 32 type of expose? Or?
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty up for being creative. And I think, you make the point. like this piece was there to be done. One of the nice things about the Athletic is that they have the time and the resource to go and do them. And obviously, I had the inside track, right? I had you, which you were.
You have. See, you thought it was the other way around, but you have cultivated a relationship with me for years, just to to position yourself to be able to get this
all these podcast appearances.
Right.
They finally paid off.
People thought that you were doing us a favor, but in fact, no. My favorite tweet from this was, the Gerbil exposed.
Yeah,
I mean, I always knew I would somehow get exposed on social media, but I had envisioned something slightly different.
I tell you what, someone in the office, I think they were trying to like come up with the subheading for the article or something, and I got that idea from them because they texted me and said, can we say that we've exposed the Gerbil? And I was like, we're saying that.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's true or not.
Were they worried about like offending the Gerbil? Or I mean, you know me well enough to know that nothing would make me happier.
I think they just wanted to know, like, where else is this news? And obviously I know it was here, and guys who knew you obviously knew, but I was like, no, in terms of like, national publications, I think we are first on this,
and more than happy to have that exclusive there. I mean, if you're going to do it anywhere, I mean, it was between that and the Wall Street Journal.
Well, so it is such a good story, though.
Financial Times.
And for the people who don't know it, obviously, I'm sure most people listening do, but the story that you were the Gerbil, and then the account ended up becoming an account that raised so much money for charity. I mean, that's genuinely a great sort of fan culture story, I think. Well,
and not trying to make it all about me, but there are a lot of people here today that don't normally watch the podcast. They're here for you. They're here for the article, some of the cross promotion that I did, where I'm sure you're going to be happy with me stopping tagging you in 87 tweets when this is over. But just to kind of go back and tell the story a little bit of Gerbil. I mean, the starts in 2017, 2018, and we're about a year into doing the podcast, and just there was one specific ITK account that just absolutely drove me nuts. And let me see if I can get this. Yeah, this one.
Right.
All right. So the football mole, just tweeting out absolute shite constantly. And, third source gets back to us on Mahrez. Some people aren't seeing this. They're just listening. So it's, third source just got back to us. Mahrez to Arsenal, done deal. This moved very quickly. Welcome to Arsenal. and the following day, Moley doesn't tweet done deal if I'm not 100%. All three of my sources say it's done. I see Sky, etc., catching up now. We took our time sharing this. And my favorite one about the Mahrez situation is that Mahrez was done so that we could show Monaco that we would leave Lamar alone if they gave us Mbappe.
Wow.
So Mahrez was a ruse all of a sudden 10 days, a little bit later on, because we were trying to trick them into giving us Mbappe. So that, there's
incredible.
that.
I don't blame you being vexed by that. I mean, I'll have whatever he's drinking. That was extraordinary.
Well, and it was one after the next. So and what really drew me in was the fact that you read the comments. First of all, the retweets would go crazy. There's 20,000 people following, so it's either him with 20,000 accounts following himself and retweeting everything, or a lot of really gullible people, unfortunately, that are just looking for somebody to worship and treat as an oracle. And why they didn't just stick with Dave Ornstein, I don't know, but they're looking for the next one, and the guy clearly had no knowledge about anything other than what he could read from other Twitter accounts. So I started the Football Gerbil account in front of about 20 people, most of whom were friends and jokesters, just ruthlessly screwing around with this guy, just imitating him in every way I could, satiring him. I had maybe 25, 30 followers on Twitter, and that was about it. But, then things got busy for me. I got tired of it, but I never got rid of the account. So then we go to, 2020, last summer, and
the mole's long gone by this point, right?
Well, not really.
Oh, really? Are they still going? They're not underground.
They're not anymore. They were always tied in with another podcast that we won't mention, but we always suspected it was one of the hosts of the podcast, and they always denied it. But yeah, they were connected to another show, and now the Mole account is actually direct. It's that podcast, and I think that so they took all the followers from there, which I would never do that. But so the there were a couple more things that the Mole did. Actually, I'll share these with you. Hold on a sec.
Make us no animosity towards this person at all, as you can see.
Yeah. He's pretty chilled out about the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
It's water under the bridge at this point. Right? Wrong one. All right. So anyway, he tweeted out a couple more things. He said, Pepe's not coming. Stop, joking around. There was the Malcom thing about the work permit he was doing. So it's just hilarious. Right. So in 2020, I end up knowing some people who know some people who know some people who every once in a while are told something, and it's usually absolute shit. Sometimes it ends up coming true, but it's already been out there in the news. So I get this little clip from somebody saying that Raul Sanllehi's been fired, been sacked. And I decided to resurrect the Gerbil account for absolutely no reason other than to maybe take a 1 in a million shot that if this ends up coming true, it's going to get weird. So I post this tweet, which is funny. Haven't posted in a while because I don't do it for attention. That was exactly why I did it. The Gerb has spoken to Raul Sanllehi and is shocked to tell you that you'll be hearing that Raul Sanllehi is no longer employed at Arsenal Football Club. So then we get Red Action AFC retweeting it. That's kind of where it went semi-viral. Then what do we get?
Meanwhile, by the way, I'm doing my job for the Athletic.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because while this is going on, I actually had some interactions with you because I wanted to pick your brain. But so tell me what's going on there.
So obviously, I've seen the Gerbil tweet, right? And there were a couple of whispers around, and I was thinking, who is this Gerbil guy? I was like, and I was like, he sounds authentic. He sounds like a Londoner. Maybe he's connected to like the old Highbury House lot. Maybe he's got connections at board level. He must know something we don't. We're chasing the story, and basically over the course of the following hours, it became clear that something had happened with Raul just from speaking to people within Arsenal. But it was actually really frustrating. We were about 2 minutes away from breaking. Well, not breaking it. We would have to said as per at Gerby Football. Raul Sanllehi has left Arsenal.
Were you prepared to credit the Gerb?
Do you know what? I don't even know if we would, and that's a shocking admission. That is disgraceful.
Journalistically, I think you could have some defensibility.
I don't think we could have counted you as one of our. We double source everything, and I don't think I could have gone to the office and been like, "Yeah, I've got a pretty good guy in Arsenal telling me this, and I've got a gerbil from the internet who I don't know anything about." But. Yeah. Anyway, we were close. We were about 2 minutes away from breaking it, and then Arsenal put the statement out. So it was very frustrating. But that's the problem when you work for a publication.
Yeah, you have to sure. Actually. Yeah, you
Whereas
can't
the
afford to be
Gerbil,
wrong.
you were not bound by these rules.
I was not. I was bound by no rules. Just the rules of nature and rodents. But like. I was bound by the fact that 23 people saw the tweet until this happened. By the way, Molly's last salvo was later that evening, the American date convention. So that's August 14th. That's not the 8th of 14-Vember. But Raul has not been sacked. Laughing emojis because Molly knows and Gerby's a fake. This is my favorite one.
I do love that one. I quoted that in the piece. Yeah,
you quoted this in the piece. There's just some real rando account out there about midway through the afternoon on the Friday. Have a word with yourselves. You're believing a fucking self-proclaimed gerbil with less than 200 followers has the inside track at Arsenal where he only knows Raul to be sacked. Idiots. And my favorite thing is a couple the next day, the response to that, aged like milk. It's great. I mean, Arsenal Twitter, literally, when people say Arsenal Twitter is undefeated, it really is undefeated. I mean, there's no group like this. So, all right, so we'll move on to the Bell in a second, but like, so I'm completely discombobulated about where I was on my content here, but so you told me at one point that you and Andrew were having a chat about the gerbil, and
oh yeah,
and at some point you were actually being accused of the gerbil. So as this 17 days of wonderment went on, what was the impact on you?
I remember, in fact, when the gerbil tweet went out about Raul, I remember Andrew from Arsenal sending it to me and being like, "This looks legit," kind of thing. And I don't think he'd mind me saying that, because everyone was like, he said he doesn't do it just for attention. So it was sort of plausible enough.
As long as that disclaimer, I mean, if the other people would have just put that in their podcast.
If only the mole had said, "FYI, guys, this ain't for attention. We bagged Mahrez," I probably would have printed that. Not
only that, but we'd probably have Mahrez at this point. If we had done that.
Well, so obviously what happened with Raul solidified the gerbil status, and when the gerbil later said the thing about Gabriel, he's not signed because there's an issue with his knees or something like that, I remember thinking, well, this guy was right on Raul, so I need to check this out. And the club were.
Is it amazing that? I mean, I know you double source everything, but but we're like intrigued. But just the general Twitter audience in general, they go from never heard of this account to, I mean, there's a thing on Reddit apparently, and I don't spend much time on Reddit, but there's a subreddit about Arsenal where they talk about the level of ITKs, and they include journalists like Fabrizio Romano and others in there, and like there's tier 1. I went from no one had ever heard from me to tier 1 in like 4 hours, and everyone, I mean, the number of messages I got asking about Gabriel, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not an ITK. I'm like, I know some stuff, I'll tell you what I can find out. And I threw a couple bones out there about like, the next board member was going to be, but mostly I just wanted to spend my time tearing. This sounds terrible coming out of a 47-year-old semi-well-adjusted adult, but I just wanted to spend my time tearing other people down, not building myself up.
That's healthy.
But that's the thing that's really interesting about kind of Arsenal Twitter, if we're generalizing, is that there's a lot of bullshit out there, but every so often something comes out via an unexpected source that is true. I mean, we've kind of had an example of that today where there were tweets from, unofficial sources, fans or people with connections to fan groups about redundancies at the club and people leaving. And then I think James Benge ultimately ran a kind of story that solidified it, and it is correct.
And we're going to talk about one of them in specific towards the end of this podcast, who's very important to us. But
right, yeah. So I mean, that's an interesting case where I don't know, maybe James knew that already, but if not, maybe he saw those murmurings, and then it's like you can turn that into a story. And the Raul one, there was a strong degree of that. And yeah, the ITK thing is just fascinating. I mean, in fairness to you, you were sort of doing it for a laugh, but there are people who are intensely committed to it, right?
And that's just what I mean. I found that to be sad, and frankly, while I was the gerbil, there would be people arguing with other people on my behalf, and I felt guilty about it because I'm like you're buying. I mean, there were some people that were just like, this guy is funny, because I tried to put some humor into it. I tried, but I mean, there would be people who were Team Gerbil versus Team Bell, because it kind of did come into that. And I got to tell you, I had never heard of the Arsenal Bell when the Gerbil thing happened. I quickly learned what was going on with it and decided to basically take him on just like I did, Moley and everyone else. And I very quickly found out this was no Moley situation. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk to you about the Bell. First of all, my thing about the Bell, clearly he did know some stuff. And ultimately, the ITK rule is if you end up getting it right in the end, everyone forgets about what you got wrong in the middle.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out August 17th, and this could be partially, I've learned due to the translation on Google. I mean, the way he wrote was either intentionally or unintentionally vague, as most ITKs are. But a couple of days until we see him as an Arsenal player. This is about 55 days before we signed him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The next one is intention to activate the release clause next week. This was August 19th. We signed him on October 5th. Mm-hmm. So let's. But here's an example of some of the anger, though. I mean, you don't have the oil money of the famous Bell and can't stand his drip. You bathe in his sauce and cry tears of envy when you realize a lonely little gerbil can't hang, and I'm quoting here, with the Arabic goat. Greatest of all time, of course. Get rich and maybe you can pay off contacts too.
Enjoyably, yeah. I think the guy who posted that is in the comments section, just saying that's me.
God, that's hilarious. I mean, that's and you know what? I loved that because it was like it was a mix between like pushing me down a few pegs where I belonged, and still showing irreverent praise for somebody who knew something but got every detail surrounding it wrong except for the end. But what can you tell us without ending up like Salman Rushdie? What can you tell us about your contacts? I mean, because you've like Icarus, you've flown pretty close to the sun when it comes to the Bell, closer than anyone else I know. So
yeah.
How did you connect with his people? What have you found out, and what can you rubbish as far as the rumors that that they were maybe too connected with the club and
too connected with the club? Yeah, I heard that rumor too, and the guys at the Bell deny it, and I believe them, to be honest. I find that unlikely simply because Arsenal. That ultimately what they're doing is sort of a media role. But that's the funny thing. Like they kind of bridge that gap between ITK and media because in terms of sort of Arab-facing Arsenal news, they were a huge website and source. And so
you can rubbish the news that they weren't Arabic at all. They were transferring it into there to show. I mean, they are actually from that area.
Yeah, and that part of the world, and they had various people working in different countries. And I didn't realize, but it turns out the AFC Bell had kind of a life before this, where they would conducted interviews with a number of like Arsenal writers, guys on the Arsenal beat who you would know. They conducted some interviews with ex-Arsenal staff. I mean, they were basically doing the same kind of like blogging service that I would have been doing years ago, but for that audience, and that there wasn't a sort of specifically tailored service for those fans in that part of the world. And then they sort of made a decision, it seems, to pursue their own news instead of just being an aggregator or people who shared other people's stories. They wanted to actually get out there and get their own news, and in that respect, hats off to them. I mean, it's incredibly it shows some real entrepreneurial initiative, and I believe firmly that in the case of Thomas Partey and some others, they were well sourced. They were inaccurate in some respects, as you say. What I'd say to that is that you've always got to think about where the information's coming from, and I think like the AFC Bell Thomas Partey saga, I think actually tells us something quite interesting about the way Arsenal conducted their business and did that deal. Because I don't think, well, in fact, the AFC Bell told me that they had connections with Thomas Partey's family and his camp. And so if Thomas Partey was led to believe for the entirety of the window, hey, don't worry, we're going to come and do this deal, that to me makes perfect sense and actually is a good example of Arsenal kind of keeping a player warm while they explored their options and tried to get a good price, right?
Mm-hmm. See, just on that whole thing, James, we've talked about a couple of different ITKs, one included below you there, but how much has these sort of modern ITKs changed the journalism landscape? You know, because in many ways, like you talked, they're almost glorified and put on a pedestal as gods when things go right. You know, obviously, as a very established journalist, you want to be fact checking and sourcing, and almost the only comparison I can maybe put it at is that they're the rock star kids going on their BMX with no helmet and jumping off curbs, whereas you know, the journalisms of the duty kids whose mum makes them wear their helmet. So obviously they can really get out in front of you in terms of getting the news out there. Has it changed the way that journalists approach putting news out there?
We've got to get Dave Ornstein on to give his opinion on this.
Yeah, he would be fascinating.
You knowing him, like, I mean, they're either encroaching upon or bastardizing what he has made a living getting known for, which is being right all the time. But
I think there are two things. I think one is that, like, one thing to say is that everybody gets it wrong sometimes. Like, even David, I will occasionally, if David reports some news that people don't like, I'll see in his replies people pulling up a tweet from 2014 where he said the Mikel Arteta deal to Arsenal was off, or whenever it was, 2011, when they signed him. Right. And the truth is, like, when you're reporting what's true in that moment. And at that point, probably the deal was off. Like, it was a very last minute deal. And we know now Everton were really reluctant to sell, and it was a big tug of war. But it's interesting, you know, you report the facts as you understand them at the time. And that means that later, with hindsight, you can look at them and go, oh, well, this is bullshit. But I think, are they encroaching on that sort of space? I would say no. I would say, ultimately, somebody like David, what he has, as I said in part one, is that authority. You know, it's like in the old days, we used to say, I'll believe it when I see the guy holding up the shirt. And now I'll believe it if David reports it to an extent, you know, and he has developed that authoritative voice, and it's an amazing thing that he's done. But it is interesting. I asked the AFC Bell if they considered themselves journalists. And they were very much like, no. They said, for us, this is a hobby. And I guess the reason and the distinction is that they can more afford to be wrong. Ultimately, it hasn't really cost them that they said a few days the deal will be done, or, you know, it'll be done by this time, or these will be the circumstances.
And it never would have cost them unless they got it wrong in the end. And that's because that's all the people will remember about the fact that Moley was right about Aubameyang 2.5 years ago, or 3 years ago, is that he ended up coming to Arsenal. But I mean, there's tweets of, you know, it's going to be his medical scheduled for Tuesday and the announcement on Wednesday, and then a week later is when the announcement. I mean, there's, you know, and meanwhile everyone else was doing it. So talking about it. So people will only remember the end. That's the kind of the ultimate moral of the story is, you know, it doesn't matter what you say. I used to say just news, not noise, because like all the intermediary stuff, why even post that? Because you have no idea what's going on. You're just gambling on the outcome.
And transfers is a really interesting one. I mean, ultimately, the Bell stuff on Partey, that was coming from the players' camp. But to borrow an Arsene Wenger phrase, in any transfer, there's three parties involved, right? Party is probably a bad word to choose. Three sides. There's the player, the buying club, and the selling club. And I'm always very wary of reporting any information that is solely from an agent.
Right.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm just really intrigued. Actually, I think James, you're probably the perfect person to ask this. How in today's market did a signing like Matt Ryan slip through the cracks?
That is such a good question.
Great question.
In fairness to David Ornstein, he did report. I think he was the first to report that Arsenal were going to try and do a goalkeeper and loan out Runarsson. And I have to tell you, Matt Ryan is a name that I heard not from anyone within the club, but we had like over on the Arscast, we had like Aussie fans saying they need to go and get Matt Ryan. He's a huge Arsenal fan. He's a great keeper. He's not getting a game at Brighton. And I was looking at that going, yeah, could be true. And I think, you know, ultimately, I probably would have to say that's kind of on me. Like, I never made that call. I never picked up the phone to his agent and said, hey, listen, what's happening here? I think probably a few things. One is that it happened very quickly. So as I understand it, the gap between Arsenal initiating contact with Brighton and him having his photos taken in Arsenal shirt was very short.
Which is so on Arsenal. I mean, that's...
And it gives a lot less time for that news to come out. The other thing to say is that his agent is not based in the UK. So maybe has less connection to journalists, I think they could say. The other thing is that Arsenal has become a much smaller club on the recruitment front, right? Like you had an entire scouting team who may or may not have had connections with the media. They're all gone. It's like a very small, like there's about less than half a dozen people who are really close to Arsenal's transfer plans at the moment. And Edu's taken a big ownership of that. So maybe some of the old networks of contacts that existed are a bit smaller now. Nonetheless, I was really pleased as a fan. I love to see a transfer happen and it not get reported. To me, that's a club that must be working really efficiently, even if it is frustrating or surprising as a journalist.
Well, the more time that drags on, the more chance there is for, I mean, whatever the transaction is, we find a way as Arsenal to, ruin our leverage.
Yeah.
In whatever way possible, whether it's delays, whether it's
the timing of it was so perfect because of all the drama surrounding Ozil's camp and the leaks coming from in there. And then within the week, it was a transfer out of nowhere. It was very shrewd by the club, I think. And I wonder, was it intentional to be done in that manner?
I think what happened was that they were looking at some other options. Matt Ryan wasn't top of their list. They were looking... They tried again for David Raya. I mean, that's a guy they really admire. There's a goalkeeper who's playing on loan at Swansea called Freddie Woodman, who they really like, and they investigated the possibility of buying him mid-season, but he would have had to break the loan with Swansea. He belongs to Newcastle. It was a very complex deal and one that would have required quite a significant outlay in January. And I think when those fell through, they kind of just went down the list and Matt Ryan was the opportunity. And I guess, sometimes it happens like that. I mean, I recall Nacho Monreal was like another deal that happened super fast. Eduardo, I remember, is the ultimate one that just was not reported anywhere. I think Thierry Henry left and all the papers were saying Nicolas Anelka, he's the target, he's who they're going to bring in. And I think Eduardo pretty much arrived, out of nowhere. It's always really nice.
Who did know about the Eduardo one was Abu Diaby told somebody at the mosque. I think.
Right? Yeah, I thought so.
I don't think that's probably not that transfer, but that I love that part of the article. So we're gonna switch away and spend a couple minutes talking about Villa, but just were your contacts with the Bell initiated just through something as simple as a Twitter DM, or did you have a bigger back channel to have to go through to get?
They have an account called the AFC Bell Desk, which is like, I guess, their kind of little editorial team. But I did actually make an approach through an individual. It's quite a lengthy process, but by sort of working out who followed who, I was able to kind of pin it down to, well, I think this person might be involved. And then I spoke to them. And in fairness, they were incredibly cooperative and, they were happy. I think they were happy to get the recognition, to be honest, because as they were saying to me, in their part of the world, in the Arab nations, that kind of very focused content about one club is quite unusual, and they're kind of breaking relatively new ground in doing that and providing really good service to those supporters in that part of the world. So I think they were really happy, and they actually said that sooner rather than later they're going to kind of reveal a bit about their methods. So I'll be really fascinated to see what that is. But they said they might explain a bit what went on over the summer.
They also said that they're going to apologize for anything they got wrong, and they expect other people to do the same as well.
That's the question: will the Gerbil back down?
Did they? I mean, did they express any anger or angst towards any rodents or anybody that questioned their legitimacy in your discussion?
Do you know what? I did actually ask them, how do you feel about people who what's the word? Doubted you, and they did give me an answer, and it didn't make the final edit of the piece. I'm just going to run it through Google Translate because I don't have my translator anymore. Okay. How did you feel when people doubted you? And this is a Google Translate version. We were overjoyed because this indicates that the level of awareness of the Arsenal audience on the Twitter platform has reached advanced stages where it does not fall victim to believing any positive news from an account of somewhat unknown reputation. So they were kind of making the case that they were pleased to be doubted because it showed, I guess, an evolution in people's relationship with ITKs, that they were open to questioning them, which I think is quite an interesting answer.
It is. And you know, nothing but begrudging respect for what they've done, not because of just the information. And I don't credit them as much as I could. I mean, there was 6 weeks where somebody else could have triggered that release clause and it would have got moved forward. So to say Arsenal's strategy was to wait until the last day, trigger the release clause, and that they just were fine gambling 45 days away where somebody else could have done that for a very good midfielder.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, I like them. I hope that we could patch it up someday. I doubt that's on their radar to even worry about that. But it's they're an interesting story. I'd like to hear more for it. I do feel.
I think they'll be back. I mean, yeah, they've sort of finished what they were doing for now, and I think they've probably all got studies or jobs to focus on. As you know, Mike, it's an exhausting business being an ITK.
It is. I mean, I had to finally hang it up and yeah, the Gabriel thing. I was so relieved that I was wrong about that because A, I wanted to sign Gabriel, and B, I could just finally just be done. I had been exposed. My followers were like dropping like a fly, like an anchor, which I didn't care about that. But Andy, to his credit, our missing co-host Andy today came up with the idea to just basically gut the account and switch it over to our cancer charity. And while that sounds really, really devious, and we did face a lot of people who were, accusing us of scamming them, it was legit. It is legit. And we actually raised quite a bit of money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society through people who found out about the charity through the Gerbil. So if there's a happy ending to the story, and I love how you kind of wrapped your story up in The Athletic with that as well, something good could possibly come from all of this. So
yeah, for sure.
Speaking of nothing good coming out of anything, we had a game on Saturday and hope to be able to pick your brain a little bit on that. And I'm sorry I ran long, Owen, on the.
No, you're sweet. So you're sweet. I'm actually. Do you want to know what, James? I'm sure, like, the people are sick of listening to it. You're probably sick talking about the actual how the game played out tactically. So I've got about 3 questions here, just that I'd like to sort of pick your brain on, of more sort of general issues around the game and the club in general. The first question I have for you basically is that there's sort of an amount of anger on social media with the officials and VAR and some of the answers given by, let's say, refereeing consultants on BT Sport and stuff around those decisions. There doesn't seem to be any criticism being heaped onto the officials from their colleagues, and it seems to be a growing issue. What do you make of VAR and how it's being implemented, and what changes do you think that the Premier League can make to rectify those mistakes?
I think that the thing that bothers me most about VAR, or certainly its implementation, is that its intention was to remove the degree of scrutiny and debate that surrounded decisions, and I think it's just amplifying it at present. And what I find frustrating is, certainly in kind of our UK coverage, it, as you alluded to, it's really taken over that, and the analysis is almost purely about officiating at this point rather than the games themselves. That said, I think you're right to sort of say that they're slow to criticize each other. I mean, I think when David Luiz was sent off, I remember seeing a slew of articles coming out from ex-referees explaining that it was all Luiz's fault and he should know the laws better. And I find that kind of thing quite tiresome, really. I sort of think, the laws there are enough kind of abstractions and confusing elements within them that I think that argument doesn't really hold with me. I think that what we have to try and do, as difficult it is distinguish between the technology and the people ultimately making the decisions. And, in the case, for example, of who's the guy who had his red card rescinded? Mike Dean gave a red card to
from Southampton.
Souček, yeah, West Ham.
Yeah.
And he had it rescinded. And ultimately, you know, VAR carries the can for that because Mike Dean's called over to look at a replay. But ultimately, it is still his decision. Now, granted, I think it's difficult because the technology applies a certain degree of pressure. If you're asked to look at something, I think you're inclined to kind of make that choice. But yeah, I think that it's a problem. And I think if it was up to me, I would be keeping the technology for objective things. You know, are you offside? Are you not? Was it in the box? Was it not? To an extent, maybe is it handball or is it not? Something that can be clearly red or green light, you know. I think when we're sort of looking at long replays, I think it's not helping the kind of more subjective calls. And there are always going to be those within football, as much as they might try and make the laws cast in iron and there be no degree of interpretation. It's just not realistic. But I mean, what do you guys think?
I think that the problem for me is that VAR was implemented to remove any argument in terms of decisions being put across or incidences on the pitch. And if anything, I think it's doubled the controversy around decisions. I think when you look at, for example, they say when they're looking at reviewing the resyndication of a red card being dealt, there's a panel of three. Normally it's a referee, an ex-player, and some other sort of person who has a background within the game. And I think that rather than having one individual in Stockley Park operating it, why not have them three people? Why not have three people operating the camera, and it's put down to a vote whether, because then it's not a colleague protecting their colleague who's out on the pitch, you know. As somebody mentioned, the roles could be reversed a week later and that guy's doing the job for him. So it's really everybody wants to stay on the sweet side of each other. Another thing, this might sound so stupid, and as if we're trying to turn it, sorry Mike, into a sort of Yankee version, you know, turn it into soccer. But
don't do that.
In 2021, I can't for the hell of me understand why the referee can't have a handheld unit to view the incidences on the pitch to stop him even having to run over to the side.
Yeah,
I think that they could look at that. But for me, if it was up to me, I would scrap it completely. If it was up to me, you know, I think it's overcomplicating what was part of the game. You know, you're down in the pub, like for example, was it Liverpool had that magic goal that went in through the side netting, and that was a big topic of discussion. It was part of the excitement, you know, for me. So.
Yeah, I think. Speaking as a supporter, I kind of feel the same. You know, I don't mind the subjectivity. I don't mind the degree of chaos. I kind of think that's partly what's exciting about sport. And, you know, I think the pursuit of objectivity is ultimately a doomed one. We're never going to get there. I don't know. But I mean, what do you think, Mike?
I just can't believe that it's gotten so bad to where it's we've always had, or not always, but much longer, I think, in this country, had instant replay in the traditional American sports. And, you know, in some cases, it's taken a lot of refining. They've made it better. They've made it worse. But it's stuck. It's on just like a slippery slope of just being applied so inconsistently that, you know, as many have said before, it's not the technology that sucks. It's the way that it's being used and the people that are using it. Mm-hmm. And it's almost allowed for more, I hate to use the C word, but more corruption or more bias, or whether intentional or not, to be implemented into it, because now there's two opportunities to express bias. There's one on the pitch, and then there's one beyond that. So if you know, we don't know what the biases always are. I know Arsenal fans always suspect that the bias is anti-Arsenal. And recently, it'd be hard to argue with that.
Well, the statistics are starting to prove it. I've seen over the last 10 seasons where we sit in terms of favourable decisions being given our way, and we're always down towards the bottom of the pecking order.
And that is subjective. And I have always railed against the concept that, you know, we would have finished in the top four if this hadn't happened. We would have won the league if that hadn't happened. I'm a believer in the law of large numbers and regression to the mean and all of those things, because I have a maths background, and it's just, but it's hard to argue that there's not some sort of thing going on here, James.
Yeah, and the other thing to say is, I guess the one kind of saving grace of what's happening at the moment is that it's not happening in front of live crowds. And I just wonder how this would be playing if there were kind of paying fans in stadiums and what it would be doing to that live experience. We've kind of got all that to come, hopefully.
It's just strange that this season in specific, and I'm just like referring to since the start of the current season that started late, there have been so many almost identical instances that you can point to that have been treated in completely different ways. End result different, process different.
The Salah one, for example, yesterday is a great example of,
And Souček versus Mane, as far as the elbowings are concerned. I mean, you can look at those two things and see the similarities and how differently they were treated. So, I don't like and want to be going on rants about that, and I don't want to start, using that as an excuse.
It's a can of worms have opened here, and it is such a big topic. But look, I think the problem, and I suppose the thought behind VAR was always that we talk about these decisions being part of the excitement, decisions going wrong. But in terms of the financial implications that those mistakes can have to clubs and have on the game, it's too big to leave the chance. But again, they have implications. And James, my last question, I know I said it 3, but this one could take you a couple of minutes, and I know that we're maybe tight on time. My last question is that the pressure has been swaying back and forth on Mikel Arteta. We've seen him sort of get a bit of respite from it there for a couple of weeks. He seemed to be sort of implementing the system well into the team. But whether it's his fault or not, results matter in football, and really the Arteta out campaign have started regaining some ammo in recent days. So the question that I'm going to put to you is one that our good friend Tom Canton at the Gooner Talk TV was talking with Mike. I had to plug him because it's his question.
At the end of the day, you're going to do that once. He's going
to give me shit if I steal his question. So I have to credit him. But it's a very simple question, but very complicated answer. We hear about the process. What is the process?
Oh, you should have warned me. You're going to ask me that.
Told you not to do it, Owen.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. When we say trust the process, what are we trusting? I don't know. I mean, I think to an extent, your eyes tell you, don't they? Well, not for everybody. Not for everybody. I know not everybody feels like this, but I do think that we are seeing progress in this team and a bit of evolution happening, even in spite of the poor recent results. And, losing to Wolves and Aston Villa, that's not a good return for any Arsenal team. I suppose the process, what we hope it is kind of the movement from the team Arteta inherited to the team that he ultimately aspires to. And it's about those players understanding and adhering to and developing in line with his ideas of football, or about acquiring the players that can play that idea of football. And I think piece by piece, we are seeing it. I mean, I remember in the summer, the most encouraging thing I heard about Arsenal's transfer business was the fact that when they sort of petitioned to get the money from the Cronkies to go and trigger the Partey clause, they had to really lay out a plan of how this team would function, how this team would work. My understanding was that even then, when Arsenal were playing with the back 3, it was all based around a back 4, 3 in midfield, 3 up front. Those sort of foundation building blocks were already those milestones were already set. And I think the process is just kind of the movement towards the Arsenal team Mikel Arteta sort of actually wants to be able to play. Now, I know people will say, and I have a lot of sympathy with this, well, why does it have to take so long? Why can't he just come in on day one and say, hey, guys, this is what we're doing? And actually, people who work with Guardiola say that the most extraordinary thing about him as a coach is that he walks in on day one, or whatever club it is, he sits down with a whiteboard, and in 15 minutes, everybody understands how that team's going to play. And I I think we have to be honest and say that Arteta, for whatever reason, I mean, listen, he ain't Pep Guardiola, and he's not had that experience yet to be able to do that. Arsenal made a big call appointing an experienced manager, and I guess part of that process is his own development and his own journey to kind of be at that point. And learning from mistakes, which he is making, and if it was, I think he will be judged differently because of that. I think if he was a guy who'd come in a bit like Emery, to be honest, a guy who had a track record, but who we knew some of their limitations, we knew some of their strengths, and they were making bad choices, I think it's inevitable they're going to be judged for that and very criticised. When it's a young guy in his first job, I think people are going to be more understanding. Some people.
Yeah. People who want to win right away won't be, but people always ask, that they're always comparing Emery and Arteta, and they can compare them based on their first 38 games. They can compare them based on this versus that, statistically speaking. But the difference is that, just like you've said, and you put it in a way that I've never really considered it before, Emery came in trying to establish his ownership of the club's process, and over the course of a year lost the dressing room because of his inability to communicate it and his man management. Whereas Arteta came in almost with no preconceived notions, has fought his way through some splits in the dressing room, some problematic contracts, and yet has still maintained, in my opinion, the trust and the support of the most important people on our club for the next 5 years, as far as on the players are concerned. And in that sense, even though we're 10th instead of 8th, even though we're out of the FA Cup this year, or we were out of the Europa League last year earlier than we were the year before, I think that says a lot, that the team is still bought in, and as long as the team's bought in, I'm buying it.
I agree, and I think even at their kind of lowest ebb, they were clearly bereft of confidence. But I think big chunks of this team really never lost a huge amount of faith in Mikel Arteta, and actually you could see that in any interviews. I remember Bernd Leno coming out and giving a really strong interview about this is on the players. Hector Bellerin did a kind of a similar thing recently. And I read the press. I read the way players talk about coaches. The way players talk about Mikel Arteta is not ordinary. They really respect and admire him. And I think they can see his vision, even if we sometimes can't. And I hope we get there. I hope it happens quickly, much more quickly than it is currently right now. And I suppose when people say trust the process, I find myself as a fan kind of thinking, well, yeah, because I don't know what's the alternative. I'm not convinced the alternative is going to be better. I think the position that we're in as a club, some of the restrictions we operate under financially, the set of players that we have, I'm not sure I see the guy out there who I'm like, well, they'll definitely want this job, and on day one they'll transform us. I think part of the reason Arteta got the job is that it's probably the best way forward for us right now, as frustrating and as slow as it can feel.
Well, someone saw the guy that would have been perfect to come in, and he was so positive about it as well. A tweet from 2018 from my beloved Molly put it this way: nothing is agreed formally with Allegri, but in my opinion, there's more chance of Molly becoming prime minister than Allegri not becoming our next manager.
Wow.
Has always been our number one priority. Meeting scheduled and expected to be concluded. So that narrows down.
He's probably not too far off. Look who's in the hot seat at the minute.
Well, I was going to say that
narrows him down. Job.
He was either, well, I guess he couldn't have been Theresa May because she was already prime minister. So he basically Boris Johnson is the mole at this point. And I think that's probably a pretty good way to wrap things up. A couple things I just want to quickly say, and a few of my very good friends who are involved in Arsenal America have said this in the chat, and I had always planned on saying something at the end of this. You mentioned, James, earlier today, redundancies at the club, further redundancies at the club, specifically in the area of ticketing. And, one person in particular who was confirmed to apparently have been made redundant is Mark Brindle. James Bench reported on it earlier today. I've spoken to Mark, and he says, you can't really talk too much about it, but it's not. I mean, it's happening. And Mark Brindle's not a ticketing agent. Mark Brindle is the supporters club liaison, and he has taken that position in my very short time of knowing him to another level in the relationship with anything having to do with promotion of support of the club. Arsenal America has benefited over the years from the relationship with the club through Mark. I know the local supporters club in London has, the supporters clubs all over the world, a lot of them in the Scandinavian countries, just have a relationship with Mark that is unlike anything else. And as I started to get to know him from a charity standpoint, from Gooners versus Cancer, he's been invaluable to us as well. Doing interference to getting signed jerseys from the women's team and helping introduce me to the right people to get other items that we were able to raffle away and make, tens of thousands of dollars on. And I just feel awful. I mean, Gunnersaurus is one thing. And Gunnersaurus, the person behind Gunnersaurus, a lot of people don't know as much about, since the dinosaur outfit is still prancing around the Emirates. But
yeah,
Mark Brindle's a big loss, and I can't help but think the team's made a mistake here because, the position itself may have some redundancy to it, and the position itself in an era where we're not bringing in game day income, and ticketing may not necessarily have the same level of involvement as it did, but the relationship aspect of it is massive. And I've got to think they might have or underestimated that. And I hope it's just a temporary furlough and not a permanent thing. But
let's hope so. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people recently about Mark, and I have met Mark, but I don't know him well. But everybody is so full of praise for him and the job he's done. And I do think it's a really sad state of affairs, to be honest. I understand there are huge financial pressures that the club is under, and this is a really unprecedented situation. But whatever happens, we are losing and have lost and may lose more of some extremely good people at Arsenal who truly, truly, truly do love the club and, have given a huge amount of service. So, I obviously can't comment on an individual situation, but it is really sad, whatever your position, to see those Arsenal people kind of coming out the club, and it doesn't help. It's sad news, really sad news.
I mean, the things that will last the longest with these clubs are the relationships and the supporters clubs, and those grow organically, but because of people like Mark. And I hate for this to sound like a eulogy. The guy's healthy as far as I know, but it's just really, really unfortunate. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Mark. If there's any organized or coordinated way of trying to appeal to the club to reverse their decision that anyone should find out about, and I'm going to be talking to the board of Arsenal America because they're good friends, let's try to make it happen, because people don't know Mark behind the scenes and what he does, and he's really important. And the last thing I want to say is the great people at Highbury Squad, Amanda, Kev, and of course Sophie, are going live in about 20 minutes at 8 o'clock UK time. They've been killing it lately with great content. It's always good to hear from Kevin Campbell, who popped into the chat and said hello earlier. They've just been doing really interesting stuff. So if you have more time tonight to listen to another good podcast or a good podcast, let's tune over to Highbury Squad on YouTube and catch that. James, what's next for you? What topics are you going to be diving into? I mean, it's only downhill from here, right?
Yeah, I tell you what, we've
hit
doing
the peak
kind
of journalistic heights, and now what's left?
Exactly, where to go. Well, I'll be spending my Valentine's Day at the Emirates Stadium on Sunday covering Arsenal Leeds. Let's hope we get a good result there. And I think later this week we did a promotion at Athletics where we kind of asked our subscribers for various topics that they wanted covered. And one of the things, I don't know why, a masochistic Arsenal fan was like, I'd love to know the full story of the doomed Luis Suarez pursuit.
That's absolutely what I would have said. Yeah.
So I think that's going to be out late this week, and we've worked with our Liverpool writers there, and it's a great story. So yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy that later in the week.
Fantastic, James. Always a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate it. You're in that pantheon of favorite guests, and you're you're relaxed, and it's a joy to talk to you. Owen, wish I could say the same thing about you, but
yeah, no,
I've
do you
only
want to
just
know
learned
what?
how to pronounce your names, but
It's been such a pleasure to sit here and watch you have your ego just blown up, even bigger than it was. You know,
sorry, everybody.
There's nothing more Mike loves than talking about himself. So it was great.
I've done one good thing in my life. And right up to the end, there was somebody in our chat who was still trying to have a go at me over everything. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I engaged him and then ignored him. Mate, it's fine. If you want to call me unethical, that's your right. But I'm unethical about a lot of things more than I am about ITK. In any case, thanks for joining us. We'll see you shortly with another guest, and come on, you Gooners.